Welcome to the BX Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Fowler, and we have another exceptional guest to share their insights and area of expertise with you on the show. Now, just before we jump into the episode, make sure you tap that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app to get more BX Podcast episodes right there in your pocket. Now, if you would like to find out more about BX and attend a meeting either in person or online, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations. Joanna Oakey is Aspect Legal's fearless leader, a managing partner and founder with more than 20 plus years of experience as a commercial lawyer behind her. She's worked with business owners and advisors at all stages of business and from a diverse portfolio of organizations. With the recent publication of Buy, Grow, Exit, is now a best-selling author and host of two of the top business law podcasts in Australia, Talking Law, providing smart legal tips for business, and The Deal Room, Australia's first mergers and acquisitions podcast. Joanna, welcome to the BX Podcast.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a very interesting conversation because legal, I feel like, is one of the most confusing aspects around business. And I'm not sure about when you first started, which we'll jump into in just a second, but I know for me, it was just something that wasn't even on my mind when I know it kind of really needed to be. It was kind of those tucked away things in the back of my mind. So I want to explore this journey with you, your journey in business, in the legal industry, and get your insights and experience on how your evolution has evolved. So to get us started, what was it that first got you into business? Were you starting off as a lawyer and had the interest in that first, or did you have the interest in business and law was secondary?
Ah, what a good question. Good Lord, Ryan, right in. Let's get started.
Starting strong.
It's interesting that you decide to start with that question because it's super insightful. I don't know if that's where it came from, but business, I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart. You know, business is sort of at my core. I love business. I love being in business. I love building a business. I love dealing with businesses. So like I think I identify myself with business as my call rather than with lawyer as my call. And I think that gave me a lot of opportunities in law, but really it was business that came first. And so, you know, I was this, you know, obviously to be a practicing lawyer, you have to go to uni, right? So,
course,
you know,
yeah.
and like many people when you leave school, like who the hell knows what you actually want to do, right? So left school, decided, you know, I'd sort of aim for these lawyer marks. I'd made the lawyer marks, so I went and did the lawyer degree. But and I've got to be honest, there were points of that degree where it was so boring, I almost died. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just like so much
falling asleep in a lecture hall.
like, do you know what? That was me. And but the reality was, I was really bored by it until I could actually see there was a particular subject that related to business law. And that's when I just suddenly hit my stride and I was like, I love this. But it was a combination of business and law that was the thing that really juiced me. And so, you know, I left uni and actually at uni I started up a business, which a different business to my legal business, which I still run to this day. But I started that business up and then I went out, you know, I started practicing as a lawyer. And the one thing, Ryan, that I noticed, two things I noticed as practicing as a lawyer. Number one, the larger the firms that I work for, the more like bitter and twisted the lawyers were about this being their career. Like, I think the reality is so many lawyers are these, you know, sort of like really highly driven people because you have to be to withstand a bloody legal degree, can I tell you? But also people who are sort of like chained to this career that doesn't give them fulfillment. And I think the reason is, number one, law at its core can be bloody boring if it's not connected to what the point is of it, what you're trying to achieve while you're there. And for me, that realization at some particular point in my journey, which I actually talk about in the book. I'll show you a picture of the book, Buy, Grow, Exit. But I think I talk about that in the book where essentially there was this point where I connected with these clients who were building these businesses but hadn't understood the legal issues that they were creating. You know, they would sort of, because growth is the most vulnerable part of a business's journey. And in that phase, most business owners are focused on that growth and on revenue and on employing staff. They're not thinking about what's the risk. What's the risk in how I'm growing this business? And I saw some spectacular failures that came from a lack of understanding of the way in which a proper recognition of legal issues and legal risk protection could help a business was the downfall. And so, you know, sorry, like, oh my goodness, what a long answer to what should be a very simple question, Ryan. but like that's where, so business came first, law came second, but it's the interaction of the two that I think is the true depth, you know, and that's why I think so many lawyers hate what they do and are really, you know, and why we've got all these jokes about lawyers, you know, like, because, you know, everyone loves
I'm just getting my favourite legal jokes and lawyer jokes pop into my head. How many lawyers have walked into a bar?
How many? I don't know.
There's, you know, those jokes. It's like a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant walk into a bar, and you just know something's going to happen at the punchline of that joke.
Well, that's it. But that's why there's this disconnect. You know what? There really honestly is this disconnect between business owners and law as a whole and legal, and for them understanding what they need to do, because lawyers sit in a world that is disconnected from business, because business owners don't feel on the same wavelength, don't understand what the lawyers are trying to communicate, because it's almost like they're communicating in two different languages, you know?
It's like legalese, I'm pretty sure, is a language of its own, and it is a difficult one to understand, especially for the entrepreneurs out there, the people with creative minds, the out-of-the-box thinkers who think the rules and limitations of the legal box is just something that needs to be broken, but there are elements that have to fit within that. And let's just take this into your journey here for a minute, because you mentioned before you've gone through legal, you've gone through a legal degree at university, you've sort of gone out, you've worked with a firm, and you've started in this legal industry for yourself coming out of uni. It's probably fresh and potentially exciting, whether that's blended with your business excitement or not. What was it like going from that process of being a lawyer in the box, following the regulations and potentially having to be a bit creative around the regulations, to having to think outside this box, start the business that you've got now, or that first business which you've still got and run? How did that mental transition happen to open up more free thinking than being stuck in the box?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I can pinpoint any one particular time. I think actually, I was having this conversation with someone just the other day. The problem with lawyers is we're all taught to think in a particular way, and the particular way is actually about identifying risk. And I am the world's largest optimist. Like, I can't help but see, like, I look at the world through rose-colored glasses, and so it was always an affront to me, to this training that is all about risk. And then, you know, working in legal firms, and it's all about identifying risk, right? And then I'd have to talk to my clients about risk. And that whole thing just never really sat well with me, because it just didn't work with my personality. I'm about growth and finding opportunity and, you know, stuff like that. And so for me, I think that sort of, that thinking out of the box happened. I mean, it happened gradually over time, as I realised. And I think with anything, as you get technical skills, the more technical skills you get, the more ability you have to understand the box that those technical skills are in, and the opportunity outside of that. You know what I mean? So part of it was sort of like a natural progression as I got technically stronger as you learn. But a part of it became through the stories of the people that the business owners that I work with. And so I work with many, because in the beginning of my career, I worked with large organisations, so corporates. I did a lot of work with corporates, but I also had the smattering of small businesses. And it sort of I got to this point in my career where I was just like, I just don't feel juiced by it. And I'm the kind of person, I'm all on or I'm all off, right? so
it's got to be exciting. It's got to be go. You've got to have that drive to make it happen.
Right, 100%. Yeah. And so, I was sort of I was in a large firm. I was sitting every day behind a desk, dealing with people, with matters that I didn't feel emotionally connected to, with matters that I, felt like where I didn't feel like I was making a difference. And one day I just went, I can't do this anymore. I can't be this. I have to be doing something where I feel connection to what I'm doing, and to be feeling like I'm making some difference. Like there's no point me coming in every day and just pushing paper around, writing words, So that's when I discovered that small business, like SMEs, like people who are building their businesses and who are going through those challenges of, legal issues when you're building a business, or building to exit, or, all of those sorts of things, that people who are in that stage have a lot on the line, so are a lot more emotionally connected to what it is that you can do to help them with, and so that's sort of when I realised I need to think outside the box in order to work out how we create service delivery to people in a way, to these business owners in a way that will really help them move forward, and in ways that are accessible for them as well, because I work for big firms, and like in reality, good quality legal advice isn't accessible for SMEs unless they have a wad of cash to pay for it. So it was like, I sort of wanted to take this skill set and insight that I had that corporates could afford to pay for, but sort of package it in a way that we could deliver it to SMEs to make a difference for them. And that required out of the box thinking, because that's a
big shift in the industry. I know you've probably got some stuff to share on, but I want to expand on this because that's a really big shift in the corporate mindset and the corporate budgets, especially. I know from my experience, I don't work in the legal industry, but there are corporate companies that I work with, and the budgets are available. They're there. The SMEs that struggle, I feel like that's one of the biggest blocking points. Just expand on the thought process behind this shift of corporate budget, corporate expenditure to SMEs, packaging, and the tailored differences that you had to make to actually make it affordable for the SMEs and packageable for you, so that it's still growing your business too.
100%, yeah. So that's such a good question. So I've done it in lots of different parts of our business. So we're a commercial legal firm, so we do a lot of work in, contract law, and in employment law, and in IP and those sorts of things. But one of our particular specializations is business sale and acquisition. So I started in business sale and acquisitions, or in sort of like larger transactions. We call it M&A, mergers and acquisitions. That's sort of like the terminology for it in the industry. But so I was in this area of M&A, and the sort of deals that I worked on were large deals. But I set up my own firm, and I worked on sort of like those mid-tier deals. But then I also had small deals that were coming into me. And the real problem I could see was that in order for me to deliver the kind of services that they needed, it was going to cost them more than they wanted to pay if I was going to bill out for my actual time on it. Does that make sense? And
yes,
so I'm just like, well, there's this whole disconnect, and what the hell do we do about it? What do we do about it as an industry? And what I did over time was I sort of unpacked, well, what are all of the different components of what relate to running a deal, so running a business sale or acquisition. And then I unpacked those and realised that what they are is a lawyer quite often fulfills a role of a legal role, but also what I see as a project management role as well. But when you go to a lawyer, what you're paying for is you're paying for the lawyer to be both the lawyer and the project manager. And so then that's when I went, okay, well, what about if we pull apart that role? And what if we have another kind of, role within our organisation that is that project manager role? And I've never heard of anyone, I was going to say in Australia, but around the world, who thinks about a transaction in that way, who thinks about, he's a lawyer, he's a project manager, because even though we're lawyers, we're actually running a project. And that's an example of how I sort of unpack that. And now we have like this massive process, and the project managers run the process with the senior lawyers behind them, actually doing all of the fundamental legal work, but where they're just pointed just at the bits they need to be pointed at, not wasting their time, chasing people up and making phone calls and sending emails, because a lot of that is the project management and running the matter forward. And so that's sort of an example of which and we've done this in loads of different areas in the firm, but that's sort of an example of how you have to rethink the way a legal matter runs in order to pull it apart and to put it back together in a way that creates a better outcome for the clients, a more cost-effective solution, but the sort of quality of approach that the corporates usually get access to.
I'm smiling as you're saying this, and for the people listening on audio, I've got the biggest grin on my face right now, because what you've just shared, Joanna, is an incredible strategy, an incredible business mindset approach to service and packaging. This is obviously different to the structured law that you were practicing at that point. Where did the business development skill side come in to be able to think about pulling that apart when you were trained as a lawyer through university? Where did that training and thought process come from?
Well, there's a couple of things. So in my uni degree, I did law. We all know the end of that story because I'm a lawyer. But I also did, I had two other majors. I had a major in communications and marketing, and I had a major in psychology. And I actually feel like both of those degrees, I've got a keen interest in what makes people tick and how to, and for me that really helps in negotiating and getting the win-win for everyone. But I wanted to bring that into the legal context. So anyway, so I guess the answer is, I think because of my interest in human nature and people and how people tick, but also that interest in the marketing together with the law, it sort of all came together. And there's not a lot of lawyers, I think, that law is a discipline that usually or quite often attracts people who really like detail. And so, and that was what I really struggled with. And, I actually am a high detail person, but not the, sort of like that black letter law side. And that's what sort of I butted up against as my issue when I first started studying law, but it's what became like the real power for me later on, because I was able to sort of look at things in a different way to perhaps how many other lawyers view things. And so there's that sort of background, and then the viewing, but also in my incessant questioning of clients, of business partners, of people that we work with about how things worked and what worked for them or what didn't. So I kept breaking it apart. And the one other thing that really, really helped was the podcast. So obviously you're running a podcast here. You probably identify with the fact that the more conversations you have with people, I started my podcast about 5 years ago. So it was like really early in the podcasting days. And one of the reasons for it, so I've got two podcasts. One's called Talking Law, and I talk all about business tips for legal tips for business people, for businesses, for entrepreneurs. The second one is called the Deal Room podcast, and that all deals with, everything to do with buying and selling a business. And I just went out and I started interviewing everyone in the industry industry. And part of the reason that I wanted to do it was because I wanted to understand the area from more perspectives than what a lawyer usually has access to. And that is the only way you can innovate. That's the only way you can get outside of the box, to understand deeply what's happening in the industry from a whole heap of different angles, because you can't innovate when you only look at something from the classic perspective that your industry is providing.
I love that you've gone down this path, and none of this has been scripted or processed. It's literally just a great segue into the next question that popped into my head, because that natural curiosity is such a driver, especially as a podcast host for yourself, myself, and pretty much every other podcast host out there. What about that curiosity has driven you so much more? And what are some of the key learnings that you've pulled from other industries that have supported you in the law business?
Yeah. So many components to that, and I'll try and be brief, which is clearly not one of my skill sets.
That's all right. We've still got time, so that's a good thing.
I remember, like, way back when, years and years and years ago, I read The E-Myth. I don't know if you've ever read The E-Myth.
Michael Gerber.
Michael Gerber. And I loved it. I just loved The E-Myth. And the E-Myth, I guess, is all about re-envisaging. I can't even say that. Yeah. Re-looking at. How about we try that?
Don't worry, I couldn't pronounce that word either. So
re-looking at the way business runs. And so I was always intrigued. I mean, I love the message. I love the idea. I love, the concept of, the technician and the, all of the entrepreneur and all of the, the different sort of ways he viewed the different sort of roles that we might go through as we become more business minded, as we become more entrepreneurial. So there's sort of two aspects. Number one, I feel like that really underpinned me understanding business a lot more and what my drive was in business to get myself out of business. And as an aside, that's something that I really butted up against in legal firms that I was in as well. When I went into these large legal firms and saw that the whole model is all about the more senior you get, just then the more work you do, and the more work you do sort of behind a desk, I was like, oh, hold on, like, I've read the E-Myth. This doesn't really, none of this makes sense to me,
that
right?
does not compute.
No, that's right. No, I don't think this is for me. I don't like this path. So there's sort of that side, but then I think when you're then being a podcaster is, as you say, about being interested in people and interested in stories and interested in different viewpoints. And the more I saw of that, the more I was able to have a really rounded view of what needed to change and what the essence was of the need of our clients at the end of the day. And I think, look, being a business owner, I sort of understand the challenges of growth, and I understand the challenges of, sort of melding growth with some of these expenses that, like, lawyers can be viewed as, because you've got to always provide. I understand the importance of providing return to our clients on their spend, which is not just, okay, I'm a lawyer, I'm going to, draft up a contract for a client. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it gave me all of those different viewpoints, but I think some of those, classic books, and I'm an avid reader, I'm always reading this sort of, all of these books that have such, and every book has got just like something that is just epic in it that quite often, and I think if you implement just one thing from every book, you just create an incredible, like, life and business.
So much knowledge
I guess it's all
built
of
into those pieces of paper that someone has spent so much time and energy writing that, like you say, that one point of implementation is just so valuable. You've mentioned this a couple of times, and I do just want to touch on this before we go any further, because I think this is an underlying theme that you've been touching on briefly, but legal aspect, or sorry, let's start that again. The legal industry has been perceived for so long as a win-lose scenario, a win-lose industry. You've brought this approach of creating win-win situations, both for yourself and your clients, and it's tied into the values and the services and everything that you've brought to the table. How important has that shift been for you in not just thinking about, rather than how can we win this case or how can we win this game, but rewriting your own rules to go, how can we create a win-win situation for all of us?
Yeah, no, really good question. And this comes back to, there've been various points in my career where I've had to make some of these sort of moral and ethical decisions about whether or not I would do certain things that clients wanted, because your power as a lawyer, you actually do have a lot of power as a lawyer. So, if I send a cease and desist letter to someone, I know that that's going to make them feel horrible, So you have, I never take lightly the impact that the legal environment can have on people. And I think that's the very first thing. But I'm all about win-wins. My sort of belief system and my values are all about building the win-win and finding good ways through to get to outcomes that work for everyone. Now, that always, obviously, we're representing our clients, and there's times when what they want is different to what someone on the other side wants. So that's obvious. But I always do it with an ends of like an ethical and moral lens first. But the thing that the industry, I think, sometimes gets wrong is this adversarial approach and believing that for one person to win, someone else has to lose. And I think you may have talked about this earlier on. And perhaps this drives particularly why I love this area of business sale and acquisitions, because that area is not about that area really only works perfectly at its best if everyone is getting the deal that they were after, and if you can find ways to help them get that deal and move it forward. And I think this is quite often why lawyers are seen as roadblocks in deals, because they're focused on the win-lose rather than the win-win, if that makes sense. Yeah. But to be focused on the win-win is hard, because you have to come up with creative solutions. You have to be willing to think outside of the safe space of what's just sort of like written there in front of you. And lawyers, quite often are afraid of making decisions that will then come and bite them later on, yeah. So they become fearful about moving out of that space. But, I just think it's really important in any sort of negotiation, but particularly in a deal, in a business sale or acquisition deal, to sort of keep everyone talking, everyone focused on what it is that they're trying to achieve, and then to find that win-win ultimately to help drive it all forward.
I can see some of the threads forming here in your experience, your early experience, and to where you are now, especially that element of curiosity and questioning. And I imagine that would be invaluable in this process of dealing with sales and acquisitions and truly understanding the value that both sides want. And let's just elaborate on this a little bit more, is what are the types of questions you're looking to ask? What are you listening for in those conversations that you're having from a vendor perspective as well as a purchaser perspective, to get to the deeper meaning of understanding what value is to both sides? Yeah.
So one of the first questions that we always ask, or that we, seek to ensure we understand about a deal, is why. It's the why. Why is someone selling their business? Why is someone buying the business? What are the main drivers for them? Because a business is all about transferring value from one entity to another effectively. But perception of what that value is and what the buyer wants to get out, what the seller wants to get out of it can actually be different. So you can't approach any sort of deal assuming that you know all of this. And one other thing I want to say is there's a whole heap of emotion. There's emotion in business sale and acquisition deals, but there's also emotion in so many reasons that people come to see a lawyer, because it can be very confrontational. You're in a confrontational space. You're in a dispute, for example, which can be very like an emotional process, essentially. In buying and selling a business, for sellers, the emotion comes in like they've built this business baby for all of these years, and they just want to feel like either, number one, they're getting the best value that they possibly can out of selling it because it's their one opportunity to turn that into money, or number two, they can be really worried about what their identity, what are they once their business is sold. So there's all of this going on in the background. And then buyers come in with their own emotion, which is, quite often this fear of the unknown, fear that there's some sort of risk in the business that they hadn't been aware of. And so I think, it's sort of about understanding each of those things. But so it's number one about having a mind of understanding all of this. But number two, it's just like actually about having really good systems and processes to understand how you take a deal from the beginning to the end whilst ensuring that you've got that proper value transfer and then without the risk, for a buyer.
And in those sales and acquisitions, I'm curious to explore a little bit more of this. How much of a business that relates to, say, founders' energy, which is a big driver of many businesses, especially the ones that the owners consider their babies, right? They've got a lot of founders' energy behind that. In that sale and acquisition process, what's been your experience in creating a transition of founders' energy and giving that kind of transfer of authority and power, for lack of a better term, in that sale process?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, because so many businesses are set up in a way that they're just not maximising themselves for an eventual exit. And it's a lot of what I talk about in the book. It's a lot of what I have seen, because I've seen hundreds, probably thousands of business sales over my career. So I've seen so many instances of businesses that have just had these massively fantastic exit, where they've sort of, it's been the exit of their dreams, where they've made, I guess the money out of the sale that they were hoping and move on to a fabulous retirement or next stage. I've also seen so many of the opposite side where people come to market and that actually is the higher number of businesses than the businesses that have great sale. The higher number is businesses who come to a point of sale either because they have to, something's happened that they didn't intend and they now need to sell quickly, or B, they just get over their business, they're tired, they've come to the end, they've come to the point of retirement, or they're just exhausted by their business. You can relate, right? Building a business can be exhausting. But the problem is when so many business owners, when they come to that point of sale, it's only at that point that they realise what drives value in a business. And the things that you're thinking about when you're growing a business are very often not the things that will drive value at exit. And the thing, and one of the reasons that I wrote the book was there's these really small decisions that business owners can make almost every day in their business that the difference will be either creating a business that has great sale value and has lots of buyers lining up who want to buy you, or who has almost no sale value. And businesses that are really where the founder or the owner is that significant driving energy, as you're talking about, that founder energy where the owner hasn't found a way to either have people or systems and processes, and ideally the three together, hold that energy without the owner, are going to find it really difficult to maximise the opportunity that their business has to create, that wealth for them at sale. So the answer is it's about education. It's about education and about realizing as early as possible in your business journey that your job is not just to know how to grow your business. Your job is also to understand how to set it up for whatever that ultimate plan is that you have for it, whether it's to exit or whether it's to run it under management as an investor, whether you want to keep running it but just with less sort of intensity over time. There's different things that you need to be doing during the life cycle of that business to set you up for that. And that's the point of education that most business owners, to be frank, just don't have.
Yeah, and I like that you've segued us to this section, because it is a big area of unknown for many business owners. What is it that actually builds value in a business? If you're the driving force, what else do I have to do? What are some of these steps? And I hope that you don't mind sharing some of these from the experience of what you've seen. And I'm sure that you share a lot of this in your book as well.
Yeah, I do. And I talk about a lot of stories, the stories of people who got it and what they did, stories of people who blew themselves up on the way, because that's actually one of the risks. One of the risks is that you drive so hard in this. And as I said earlier on, growth is one of the most vulnerable points for a business, because that's the period of time when there's so much happening. Usually what happens is the business itself is growing faster than the infrastructure that's holding it up, and in particular, the legal infrastructure that's holding it up. And so what do businesses need to do to maximize that value? Number one, not blow themselves up along the way. Like that's the first one.
That's a great one. Don't blow yourself up.
But I've got to say, and obviously, I've got 2 decades or plus in the industry now. So I know so many business owners and, have become such close friends with so many of them but the number of businesses that grow quickly and then have either one massive event or usually a series of events that happen to them that then depletes the value in their business is, I'd say 80% of businesses that I've dealt with. It's like a really percentage. And I'm not saying they've blown themselves up to that whole 80% have blown themselves out of business, but they've done things along the way, or the growth along the way has created issues that has ultimately meant they just haven't been able to maximize their potential. And that happens. But the thing is, number one, how do you recover? Can you recover? That's the main thing. How do you recover? I've got this great client that I worked on. Maybe it was about 10 years ago. I can't remember. And he was just like, it's this fabulous story. He was this immigrant from Italy, and he came here to Australia with absolutely nothing, and he built his business up over 40 years. And of course I had him on the podcast because I love to hear his story. But he just talked to me about this period of time through his business and all of these struggles that he'd had along the way, and he built it up, and then something happened and it dropped down, and built it up, and something happened and it dropped down again, and built it up, and then he got to this really great exit, and I met him at exit, and then had the pleasure of working with him through exit, and then and I still keep in contact with him today because I just love to hear about how much fun he's having in retirement. But he is the quintessential example of he had holes in his foundation, but he'd done some good work along the way to protect himself enough so that when those storms of business hit, which they will, he was strong. His business was strong enough for him to bounce back. And just the likelihood is for anyone in business, you just got to understand it's a thing. Stuff happens in business. Or use stuff. Stuff happens in business that you can't predict. The point is you need to make sure you're strong enough that you can make it through to the other side, and that you have enough energy That's another thing, right? That you've got enough energy to withstand and continue growing. So one of the rules of good exit is don't blow yourself up, and make sure you've got a strong enough legal infrastructure so that if storms happen, you can recover from it. The second thing is to grow with a mind for what is value in the type of business that you're in. So what creates value? People often think, well, value is the revenue in my business, but quite often that is not what the value is. The value is the transferability. That might be the profit multiple, the transferability of the stuff that's creating revenue. So the systems and the processes, the relationships that you have embedded within the organisation, rather than just in the head of the owner and the relationships of the founder, if that makes sense. And there's a whole list of these things. Obviously, I go through it in the book, but that I don't want to. That sort of gives you a bit of insight.
We'd be on for a very long podcast episode if we went through everything that built value. I love that you've brought up this idea of systems and processes, because that's something that is, again, probably another mystery to many business owners, unless they're fairly well established and realized the failings of some of their own systems and processes before they implemented things. I want to just shift this a little bit in that through all of this, you've got a lot of experience. You've worked with hundreds of business sales. In your own personal journey, there's always these ups and downs of our own. And this is probably one of our favorite questions to ask our experts on the podcast is, in your own business journey, this growth that you've had, this exceptional system and platform that you've been able to create in the business you have now, what have been some of the biggest learnings? I prefer that rather than failures, but what have been some of the biggest learnings that you've had to go through, embody, and then implement changes to avoid them happening again?
Oh, good Lord, Ryan, how long do we have? Well, let's get started. This could be a long one. No, I'm kidding. Business is hard, isn't it? Like, it really honestly is. It is hard. It is. And there's challenges sort of around every corner. It's sort of like a roller coaster, isn't it? The roller coaster of business, just when you think everything's going great, suddenly, it's
down and it's up and it's down and then it's taken off and then it's gone to ground.
But I think there've been sort of like a number of different points. So, sort of like the first point was when I realised I needed to step out of the traditional approach to the industry and think out of the box more. That was sort of more like a personal epiphany and a personal challenge I was having that where I wasn't feeling fulfillment. And so, that was the first thing for me, the issue to deal with. How do I, within this industry, or is it even within this industry, how do I find something fulfilling and something that I feel like actually delivers value? So that was that really was one of the first things. Another thing along the way is, as you start to scale a business, one of the issues that I had was I had a really clear way of how I wanted to deliver value. But as you grow, it's harder to keep hold of those service values that you feel are so important. And I think anyone who's gone through scaling a business will understand the challenges of making sure the business that you're creating at scale is still the same business that was you at the core, in the beginning of the business. So that was a real challenge for me over time. How do I do that? And for a long period, there's many different elements of that. And at times it was through people, so hiring the right people. But I came to this real point in my business where I realised hiring the right people was just not enough. I had to be in there and build the systems and processes that would ensure that even the right people who came on board also did the right things at the right times. So systems, building the requirement to build systems and processes to deal with the reality of differences in humans and how humans deal with things was another really big challenge that I had to deal with. There was this particular point in the business where I was where I just things have been going really well, like you know, and I love marketing, and I was doing lots of marketing, bringing loads of work in, and then suddenly everything felt like it imploded at a particular time. Okay. And I was just like, and you know, like I had some staffing issues, and I was just like, I couldn't get that scaling thing what I wanted it to be. And I remember I just picked up this book. I don't know if you've ever read The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Halliday.
No, I haven't yet.
I highly recommend it. It's in fact, I never even got to the end of the book. In fact, to be honest, I didn't even make it more than halfway through, but I got what I needed.
You got your one thing to implement.
I got my one thing. And his whole concept was, if you, the thing that causes you, the thing that is your greatest obstacle is actually your greatest opportunity. And, you know, and I just thought about that for quite, and Lord, I hope he actually said that, because I don't know, because that's what I got out of it. But maybe like I read one line, not the way it was meant. But anyway, but
the remembering is different to the actual wording, but it's the same. It's close enough, right?
I know, like, don't like shoot me over social media if I actually got the whole thing wrong. But anyway, this is what it gave to me, right? This is my story. I'm telling you my story. I read The Obstacle is the Way, and I just, you know, it was at that real point where I was like, do you know what? I poured so much time and energy. I just don't know if I've got the energy for this anymore. I'm depleted. It's hard. What am I going to do? And I read this book and I just went, you know what? There's the answer. The obstacle is the way. All I have to do is work out how I deal with this obstacle, and it will create my biggest opportunity. And that was when I really went back to Gerber and systems and really that real pulling apart the way I was doing it and putting it back together in the new way of viewing it. But without those challenges, I would never have had a strong enough impetus to put in the work that it needed. And bloody hell, it was a lot of work to put in the work that was needed to recreate the system. And the truth, Ryan, is the obstacle is the way. And I just, you know, for me, it's that sort of thought process. It was the book that I needed at the right time. But, you know, I highly recommend it to anyone who's sitting there at the moment with some challenges, because for me, it was sort of life-changing and business-changing.
That's a very powerful shift in mindset, because I know that I've felt like before I've had just the weight of the world on my shoulders, which was the business, and that process of reframing how you think about those things, how you think about that obstacle. I love that you've shared that example. It's so powerful in so many different ways. My follow-up to that is, in that process of understanding the obstacle is the way, knowing that there's an opportunity on the other side, what was the mindset of resilience like in that process of creation to get through the challenge of the obstacle?
Yeah, so I think it doesn't just, so number one, mindset, as you absolutely say, is so critical. Like, it's really critical in business. And I think you've got to be, we're a funny lot, us entrepreneurs, right? You've got to be a bit mad to be in business, because
it's a little bit of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, I think there was another book that helped me with this as well. I'm sorry to keep talking about books, but I just think it's like these taking points of learning is so useful for people. So for me, there's a mindset thing. So obstacle is the way. Okay, I reframe the way I look at it. I look at my obstacle and I go, okay, if I can turn this around, if I can find the answer, that will be my power, right? And this is actually what I say to my team all the time. We have Feedback Friday, where we have like a reflection on the week, and we always talk about what was the one thing in the one system that we work with in the week that worked really well, and what was the one thing in the week or in our matters or whatever that didn't work as well as it could, and we could maybe there's something that we can change out of it. And it's that discipline of constantly looking at these things. What didn't quite go well? What can we make slight shifts to build something better, so it's that mind. And I say to everyone on our team, don't look at a mistake or something that didn't go well as a bad thing. Like, it is, we don't want anything to not go well, but every time we identify it and then build a system around it, we become so powerful. We create something powerful and different and strong. So, look at these things as opportunities. So number one, it's a mindset. But number two, it's a discipline. And I'm all about the discipline of business as well, and the discipline of the habits that set you up in the right way. So you've got to have, and when I was talking before about the importance of understanding whether you're building a business of value, ultimately that will deliver what you want at the end of the day. It's vision first, but then in order to get there, you need to create the roadmap out of that vision, but then you need discipline. And Atomic Habits is another excellent book. And we have something called Aspect Academy at our at Aspect Legal to teach our, like, it's sort of personal and professional development that we have each month. And I did an Atomic Habits focus one day, and the whole idea was that the whole idea of Atomic Habits is that the small commitments that you make, that you commit to absolutely on a daily basis, that will then build that habit, and the small changes that make big differences. Ultimately, it's sort of that two things: the habit, and then small incrementally equals big. So I think the reality is you need to have that vision for how to deal with the issues or obstacles or the whatever, but then you have to have the discipline to every single day work on it, work yourself forward, know where you're going, progress forward. That's how I wrote the book. That was, and I wrote it in the middle of COVID, and I had a child who was in the kindergarten that I was running the business, trying to make sure it kept afloat. And this was a time when, M&A activity just halted, so it was sort of a confronting time, but at the same time running the business and keeping it safe, homeschooling my kindergarten child, and then also writing a book. But I made this commitment to myself that I'd write the book, because this was sort of part of the vision. So every single day I just got up and I said, all I've got to do is write for 2 minutes. I'll just write for 2 minutes every day. And the only time in the day I could do it, because we're homeschooling the kids during the day and running the business and whatever, was like at 4 a.m. in the morning. So fine, I'll put my alarm on 4 a.m. and sometimes it was 3:30, because then 4 a.m. I had to get up and deal with, something else that was going on. Yep. Put my alarm on at 3:30 or 4 every single morning until that book was written. Every single morning I got up and I promised myself I'd write for at least 2 minutes, and generally I, wrote for an hour or two. And then through that, that's how I wrote the book. And I think that's the lesson ultimately for us as we build, not to get up at 3:30. You don't have to get up at 3:30. That's not the lesson. It's about vision, but then it's also about discipline. And that's how you achieve things ultimately. Because if you don't have a clear path and you don't have the discipline to follow it, then it's just pipe dreams, isn't it?
There's so much wisdom in what you've just said. I'm sitting here and going, okay, that relates to that. That's good over there. It's like all connecting in my head, right? And the two big things that I got out of that is motivation doesn't create action. Action creates motivation. And it's not a revolution, it's an evolution, that consistent progress. And those are actually two of my favorite sayings. So I'm really glad that you touched on all those.
I love it.
The other thing that I do want to ask just before we wrap this episode up is, throughout everything that you've done, these businesses that you've supported, the business that you've grown yourself, what has been your favorite lesson or your favorite win from the time that you've had in business so far?
Oh, Lordy, I have no idea.
That's okay, you really
got me on that one. What's my biggest win? Do you know what? Like, I feel the business is in a really nice space at the moment. I'd always had this dream that I'd build this business full of people who just loved coming to work each day, that was full of people that I loved coming to work to see each day, where people came to work because they were motivated and loved it, not because they were chained to their office, like I talked about, early in my career that I saw lawyers, that provide something of real value to their clients and that makes some sort of, impact or difference or positive impact in the community at large. And, I feel in my own little way, just from my own perspective, that I feel like I've got that business now, and that is just so, I love coming to work every day. I love the clients that we work with. I love, the reactions that we get to the work we produce and the, and the difference I feel we can help make to business owners as they deal with some of the most critical issues that perhaps they have in their business life cycle, and that we've got team who love being there. I don't know, what more could one ask for, Ryan?
That is so powerful, and I can hear the passion about it in your voice. I can see it on your face when I look over to my left on the screen. And it just shines through the authenticity that you have, and I absolutely love that. Just before we wrap up, can you share a little bit more about Aspect Legal? You've shared a little bit about the services you offer, but give us a rundown of the support that you offer businesses through Aspect Legal and how people can connect with you and find out more.
Yeah, thank you. So the book is called Buy, Grow, Exit, and that's exactly what we help our clients do. So acquire businesses as part of their growth or the beginning of their journey, to grow their business in a safe and secure way, and to ultimately help them get to that point and then execute that point of an exit that is everything that they'd ever hoped for. So, it's through that life cycle. We work with businesses through that life cycle. We work with SMEs, all day, every day. Our services are all just absolutely focused on SMEs and of taking them through that life cycle of legal education, I've got all of this information, podcasts and whatever, that's free. I just want people to be protected, but we also have a whole heap of services that help implement that concept of safe and successful acquisitions, safe and successful growth, and epic exits. So yeah, and I guess, we've got a website, aspectlegal.com.au, where you can find links to the podcast and the book, or you can book in a call with our legal team and we can walk you through some of the ways that we deal with clients. But even if you do none of that, just go and get yourself educated. It costs nothing to listen to podcasts like this, to listen to, the whole heap of legal podcasts. So I've got more than 450 episodes in total across the two podcasts. So there's a heap of free content there.
So much there.
Knock yourself out. There's no excuses for not being educated, right?
Absolutely. We'll link to all of that in the show notes down below as well. So if you're listening or watching, then you can find all of that information at the tap of a button. Joanna, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the BX podcast, to enjoy this conversation with you and just understand so much more about what you do, the legal industry, and how that plays out in business. So thank you so much for being on the BX podcast.
Oh, Ryan, thanks so much for having me. I've had a lot of fun. It's been interesting being on the other side, and sorry if my answers were really long. Anyway, hopefully it's somewhat interesting.
It's always interesting. That wraps it up for today's episode of the BX podcast. You can get more of the show by simply tapping the follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. To join us at a live and in-person or online event, head over to bxnetworking.com/locations. That's bxnetworking.com/locations to find a meeting near you. We look forward to talking to you next time on the BX podcast.